Welcome back to the Badass Literature Society, where badasses come together to rate and review novels recommended by you. Hi, I'm Michael. It's going to be a special bonus episode. In this episode, it's just going to be me. I'm going to give you a bonus review of a book that I read not that long ago called The Terminalist by Jack Carr. And so I'm going to talk about some of the basics of the book and some things that I liked and disliked about it, and then kind of go through our normal review structure, just by myself this time. So yeah, let's get into it. So first, let's talk about Jack Carr. Jack Carr led special operations teams as a team leader, platoon commander, troop commander, and task unit commander. Over his 20 years in naval special warfare, he transitioned from an enlisted SEAL sniper to a junior officer leading assault and sniper teams in Iraq and Afghanistan, to a platoon commander practicing counterinsurgency in the southern Philippines, to commanding a special operations task unit in the most Iranian-influenced section of southern Iraq throughout the tumultuous drawdown of U.S. forces. And then if we're going to talk a little bit about the book itself, here is a brief synopsis. A Navy SEAL has nothing left to live for and everything to kill for after he discovers that the American government is behind the deaths of his team in this ripped-from-the-headlines political thriller. On his last combat deployment, Lieutenant Commander James Reece's entire team was killed in a catastrophic ambush that also claimed the lives of the aircrew sent in to rescue them. But when those dearest to him are murdered on the day of his homecoming, Reece discovers that this was not an act of war by a foreign enemy, but a conspiracy that runs to the highest levels of government. Now, with no family and free from the military's command structure, Reece applies the lessons he's learned in over a decade of constant warfare toward avenging the deaths of his family and teammates. With breathless pacing and relentless suspense, Reece ruthlessly targets his enemies in the upper echelons of power without regard for the laws of combat or the rule of law. So, what did I think about The Terminalist? I loved it. This is exactly my kind of book. You've heard me talk about it before on other bonus episodes or episodes where we've talked about the kind of stuff that we like to read. I love these kinds of books. I especially liked The Terminalist because I thought it was a really interesting and unique story. I also thought that Jack Carr's background, the author's background, brings a lot of authenticity that we don't always get in these books. And what I mean is that not necessarily that that the other authors that have done this aren't writing an authentic story, but I think it's different when you're someone who has done these things and this has been their career and this has been what you've done. For most of your life, that brings a little bit different level of authenticity than just the research that you'd get from other authors who write in this genre. Now, since I'm all by myself, I am not going to share my score because that's going to be at the end. But like all of our other review episodes, the rest of this episode, so from here on out, is going to be not spoiler-free. So if you are interested in reading The Terminalist and you do not want anything to be spoiled, then go ahead and stop here or pause here and then come back later. For those of you leaving us, don't forget to give us a rating if you like us, and make sure you're following us on Instagram and Facebook. Our handle is @BadassLitPod in both places. We'd love to hear from you. If you've got a book you want us to read, let us know. And now, for those of you sticking around for the spoilers, here we go. So, what drew me to The Terminalist in the first place? It's a great question, and it's in this case, it's the TV show. I watched the TV show that Prime Video put out with Chris Pratt in the main role, and I loved it. And I was like, God, this is so good. I'm sure the book would be awesome, and it was. To be honest, I liked the book even better than the show. So I can't really speak to what, if it's like, I don't know, a story where I was walking around Barnes & Noble or something and was drawn to the book because I found the TV show first. And as far as any expectations that I had going into the book, I think on some level I expected it to be a little bit better because in my general experience, the book is usually better than the movie. But I mean, that was met and, and then some for this one. The TV show is phenomenal. Don't get me wrong. I loved the first season of a TV show. I'm excited to go back and watch the second season whenever that comes out. But I do love the books a little bit more than the show. I think the books are better. Now, the main protagonist of this book is James Reece. James Reece is a very interesting character in that he is this guy that is this kind of normal guy in the grand scheme of things. I mean, yes, he's a Navy SEAL. Yes, he's this incredible warrior. But his life and the things that we see, outside of his military career are pretty normal. He's got a family. He's got a home to get back to. And in this book, the government and his friends, people that he knows and has trusted for years, betray him, and that's what ends up happening on this mission, where his entire team dies, and spoiler alert, he was supposed to die. That was the plan, is that all of them were going to die, and he comes home, and instead of just leaning into this narrative and forgetting about it, he pushes back, and because he pushes back, his family ends up getting in the crosshairs, and they kill his wife and they kill his kid, and that kind of spawns the whole rest of this novel, which just becomes from that point on about vengeance against the people that destroyed not only his wife and daughter, but also who were responsible for the deaths of his team on this mission that was designed to fail. As far as pacing goes for this story, I think it was fantastic. I think that for this kind of a book, you have to have a keep you on the edge of your seat pace, and Jack Carr definitely succeeds at that in the Terminal List. I remember when I was reading it, I plowed through it. I didn't want to stop reading. I didn't want to put it down. I wanted to know what happened next, and so the pacing was fantastic in that way. I read this book so quickly, and full disclosure, I've read the first 3 books in the series now, and I powered through them in I want to say I read the first 2 books in a couple weeks, and then I picked up the third one, and I read that in about the same amount of time. It was just a little bit later. So the pacing is very good. It's very exciting. It's very action packed. There's lots of suspense. You will not be bored reading this book at all. And like I mentioned before, I think that the author's background as a former Navy SEAL brought a lot of authenticity to this character in the fact that they are also a Navy SEAL, and getting to see some of those military and tactical elements that he learned from his time doing that be described and brought to life in the book. I did think it was interesting that so because he was a Navy SEAL when he wrote this book, he has to submit anything that he has written, I'm talking about the author, Jack Carr, to the Pentagon for approval, and he has submitted all of his books that he's written, and they've always come back and said, hey, you can't talk about this, and they've redacted portions of the book. And what I think is interesting that some authors, or that he did versus what some authors do, is he actually left the redacted stuff in there. And what I mean is not that he said, screw you and put it in there anyway, but instead of just removing that content from the book, he left it in, and just it's got the black bars over it instead, which was kind of interesting to see, and try to figure out what might have been the thing that was redacted in those portions. As far as the other aspects of the realism and authenticity, I think the description of not only the tactics, but some of the weapons and the tools and things that they were using and settings that they were in, it definitely adds to your level of immersion in the book when it's very realistic, and it's very you could tell the author knows what they're talking about. As far as the book, or the story, I guess I should say, the plot was incredibly interesting. The fact that we're looking at someone who has this list of people that he thinks deserves to die based on what has happened to him and happened to his family and happened to his his team overseas. And that list is ever evolving as slowly throughout the book, us as the reader and James Reece, the character, are peeling back layers of the onion of this conspiracy to see deeper and deeper into it. And in the case of this book, seeing both how high up the ladder as far as power and the government of the United States, and how close it gets to James Reece, because we find out that not only does this go all the way up to the Secretary of Defense, but also James Reece's best friend is is helping with this whole process. A guy named Ben who works for the CIA helped set up the entire ambush, and so we find out that not only has James been betrayed by his government, but he's been betrayed by his best friend, and that hits pretty hard when it happens. My favorite side character or secondary character, though, I think would be Katie. Katie is the journalist who James Reece works with to try to make sure that no matter what happens to him, the story of this conspiracy and the things that are happening gets told. And she's a really interesting character because not only is she willing to lay her life on the line to tell this story. So she's clearly a very dedicated journalist, but she's also a good friend to Reece in a lot of ways when things start to take an ugly path. And, it gets to the point where she ends up getting taken hostage at the very, at the end of the book. That's kind of the big climax is she gets taken hostage by Ben and the Secretary of Defense. And it's this whole scene as to what's going to happen, and is he going to be able to save her as he's one man sieging this massive compound that is supposedly incredibly well guarded, as you would expect it to be if we're talking about the Secretary of Defense. But it's a pretty epic scene, and I highly recommend that if you like this kind of book, if you like military thrillers, if you're into to anything along these lines, I highly recommend you check out these books. The story is fantastic. Jack Carr is a really good writer, and I highly recommend checking it out. If you're not into military thrillers and this is not your cup of tea, which I think that's where Barbara and Lauren, my partners on this podcast, would be, that this is not their kind of book. That's why I'm reviewing this for myself. But if it is your kind of book, then I absolutely recommend you check it out. I think it's a fantastic addition to the genre. I've read a lot of other books like this, or I guess not exactly like this, but in this genre, it's like I just said, it's a genre that I'm a fan of, and I think that the Terminalist has really solidified itself in the upper echelon for me of series that exists in this genre. It's fantastic. It's very easy to read. I found myself, like I mentioned before, just plowing through it because I could not put the book down. I wanted to know what happened. So when I wasn't able to be physically reading, I was listening to the audiobook so that I could get more of the story. I loved it. As I mentioned earlier, this is a book series. The Terminalist is the first book in the series. There are, I think it's either 5 or 6 books that are out now. It's 6 books. 6 books that are out now. So I've read the first 3. I own 4 and 5. I have not picked up the 6th one yet, but I need to get back into reading those. I've been a little busy reading other podcast books like that we've been reviewing for you guys, but it's great. The books 2 and 3 are also fantastic. I'll maybe be bringing reviews to those to the podcast, as well as little bonus episodes like this in the future. But yeah, I'm definitely interested in reading the sequels. I am super excited also to see where the Prime Video TV show goes to, since it did get renewed for a season 2, and I think that the plan there is to cover the second book's story, which is True Believer, and I'm very interested to see how that goes too. But yeah, overall impressions of A Terminalist, I loved it. I highly recommend it if you're into this genre of book. I would give it a solid 8.5 out of 10. That's my rating for it. I can't recommend it enough. If this is something that you're a genre that you're into, I think that you will find that you really enjoy this, and like me, you'll plow through it and probably want to pick up the sequels sooner rather than later. I guess I didn't mention or do the Badass Character Award, but since it's just me, I guess I get to pick the recipient myself. It's pretty evidently James Reece is the winner of the Badass Character Award for this book. He does a lot of really badass things in the book. Some are a little grotesque, and by little I mean a lot. Like there's a scene where he kills a guy, and by pinning his, intestines to hold on, how do I want to phrase that? Like a pole, and making him walk around, to have it be pulled out. Now, normally at this point, we would talk about, or I would talk about, what my predictions are for the future. Since I've already read books 2 and 3, that feels like cheating, though, so I'm going to skip that, and just end with letting you know that the book was fantastic. 8.5 rating for me, and I highly recommend that you check it out if this is a genre that you're at all interested in. And then check out the TV show if you like the book, because the TV show is fantastic as well. So make sure you're following Badass Literature for free in your favorite podcast app. Give us a rating and leave us a review if they'll allow you to. Also, don't forget to follow us on social media. Our username is @BadassLitPod on both Instagram and Facebook. If you have feedback about today's episode, contact us by writing to badassliteraturesociety@gmail.com. You can also send us a DM or leave a comment on Instagram or Facebook. Thank you so much for listening. I'm Michael. See you next time.